So what's happening with Cannibal Corpse?
With us guys, we're getting into the studio in August, and we're going to be putting that out and hopefully touring sometime in the new year.
We were really disappointed with the lyrics. We were disappointed with his voice. We were disappointed with his patterns, you know.
Today we are going through every 6 Feet Under album and coming up with a better death metal album from the same year, starting with Killing for Revenge in 2024. No Nothing Ingrate actually gave me hope that this album would be better than it was, but that did not end up being the case. Things already start to go off the rails just a track later with Accomplice to Evil Deeds. Of the tracks that are still decently enjoyable, I'd name Ascension and Fit of Carnage. There's a pretty decent, if kind of paint-by-numbers run from Judgment Day to Mass Casualty Murderside, but as usual, Chris's incessant grunting gets pretty unbearable, and there are just so many better options for death metal in this year, but choosing one of the same wavelength, I'm going with Undeath with More Insane. I must have been the only one on the planet who didn't much care for It's Time to Rise from the Grave, but this follow-up from the New York band absolutely knocked my socks off with its sheer speed and very tight, to-the-point, and frankly enthralling songwriting. Not to mention the riffs are a perfect combination of Cannibal Corpse intensity with the melodic hooks of At the Gates and Dismember, from highly infectious growl-along vocal moments to some pretty epic harmonized riffing and soloing. This album's brisk 34-minute runtime shows how it's done. And just a reminder, if you're new to this series, I'm being a little bit facetious. Like, if you love these albums, then that is totally fine, but this is just kind of an opportunity for me to share stuff that I love even more. So that said, let's move on to Nightmares of the Decomposed in 2020.
Pick up the pieces of my destruction.
Now, it's bad enough that any professional signed band could even write a song as bad as Zodiac, but then to choose it as the lead single...
It's so fucking bleak, it's making me lightheaded.
This might be the most abysmal thing the band has ever put out, and that's a pretty tall order. It has a few decent moments like the bass on Blood of the Zombie or the era-appropriate psychedelic solo on Zodiac, but as a whole, I find this thing very embarrassing. I've called this one of the worst albums I've ever heard, so again, easy to find a better one, but in this case, I'm going with Beneath the Massacre with Fearmonger. The total opposite here, with another returning act absolutely defying expectations with arguably their best album. The perfect fusion of dizzying technicality and fierce infectious hooks takes all the band's best qualities and amplifies them to their absolute peak. 10 battering tracks that will absolutely body you. The guitar work and drumming will break your brain, but never at the sacrifice of memorable songs. Then we have Torment in 2017. There are some decent moments like the impressive bass noodling on Exploratory Homicide and Marco Pietruzella, Vital Remains, and The Faceless giving a strong performance on the kit. But for the most part, this album takes several steps back in songwriting, and Chris sounds pretty awful. His vocals are particularly blown out on the separation of flesh from bone, skeleton, and bloody underwear. It's mostly a chore to get through, especially in a year where we could be listening to Immolation with Atonement. This New York death metal band proving that age is just a number, so for those people who are always like, we're just lucky to get another band, there are plenty of long-running bands out there still putting out good stuff, y'all. The Distorting Light is a massive way to start off this album. I love how this track mixes the band's old-school death metal roots with the more atmospheric and blackened stylings of groups like Abyssal and Adversarial. The rest of the album is also very strong, but taking a more straightforward approach with a lot of mid-pace tracks and some doom influences here and there too. Strong vocals, hooky guitars, and pummeling drums. Then we have Crypt of the Devil in 2015. One of the few 6 Feet Under albums I actually enjoy. Ripper opener with Gruesome, this time thanks to Brandon Ellis of the Black Dahlia Murder on Axe Duty. He brings their most shredding solos yet, and the bass tone here is pretty wicked as well. Love the pace change on Break the Cross in Half, another super heavy one in Lost Remains. Great atmospheric leads on Compulsion to Brutalize, and another great closer in Eternal in Darkness. Not every song is on the same level, but still one of their better outings, but even so, it can't hold a candle to Cattle Decapitation with the Anthropocene Extinction.
Nothing to lose, no one to blame.
Right from that ominous opening melody of manufactured Extinct, I knew that I was in for a ride with this one. Travis continuing to lean more into the goblin singing for what I would genuinely describe as some of the most breathtaking moments of their entire catalog on this one, with the likes of Plagueborn, Circo Inhumanitas, and the haunting conclusion of Pacific Grim. Some of their best songs overall too, with the Prophets of Loss, Clandestine Ways, and the mournful Mammals in Babylon. Honestly, every song here is basically a 10 out of 10. I think I put this album on my 10 out of 10 perfect albums list too, so yeah, excellent stuff. Then we have Unborn in 2013. Another album I actually kind of like, legit banging my head a little bit to Zombie Blood Curse, and then Decapitate and Incision are actually quite good too, with some surprisingly dynamic guitar work. Frankly, the riffs here in general may be some of the band's best, thanks in large part to Ola Englund of The Haunted taking lead, and guest appearances from Ben Savage of Whitechapel. Chris is still Chris, but surround him with talent and some of their most full-sounding production as well, and this shines up pretty well. Also dig the really infectious grooves of Alive to Kill You, Inferno, and Psychosis. Killer closer too in The Curse of Ancient, and yet, in this year, we also got Carcass with Surgical Steel. Another 90s death metal band comes out of retirement to once more show how it's done with arguably also one of the most positively received comeback albums in the genre. This record hits so hard despite the melodic flourishes, and honestly may even give Heartwork a run for its money. Start to finish banger, every track is amazing, proof that they still are one of the greatest of all time.
Can you deal with that?
Then there's Undead in 2012. Decent enough album. Barnes called this a rebirth of the band in the lead up to the release, and I can hear some renewed energy, but it's unfortunately still not really translating into the greatest songs. There are some more decent ones like Molested Dead, Near Death Experience, and Delayed Combustion Device, which are all kind of chuggers, and then Vampire Apocalypse has some fun harmonics. Now, I had two options that were really hard to choose between, one of which was Dying Fetus with Reign Supreme, but I can't miss the opportunity to create extra salt by putting Chris head-to-head with his own former band, with Cannibal Corpse with Torture. The production on this is just perfect. It's got that rawness to it, but everything comes through perfectly, and there's a nice stomp to some of the slower tracks. And then alternatively, ragers like Demented Aggression and Sarcophagic Frenzy just rip through you. Love the big sludgy intro of Scourge of Iron, even more of that Where the Slime Live kind of energy on that one.
Ah, foreshadowing.
Very technical guitar work all over this thing, but woven into memorable melodies, especially on tracks like Intestinal Crank and Followed Home Then Killed, one of their best works and easily bodies Undead. We also have Death Rituals in 2008. Opening on a surprisingly atmospheric note with Death by Machete, and with a decent enough vocal performance too, but sadly things get gurgly right after that with Involuntary Movement of Dead Flesh. Likewise, even some E on None Will Escape, Seed of Filth is incredibly dull save for the solo, and then Motley Crue cover of Bastard just sounds terrible. Honestly, every time this band does a cover, they're just really bad.
Stop trying.
Extra points off too for being 49 minutes of this crap. I was glad when it was over, and I would easily give the vote here to Krisiun with Southern Storm. Nice to be able to hit so many different great bands on this list. This is the Brazilians' 7th album and highest rated on Metal Archives and Metal Storm, as well as their 3rd highest ranked on Rate Your Music. And rightly so, with such an efficiently battering display of violence that, despite being a few minutes longer than Death Rituals, does infinitely more with its time. Insane riffs and drumming with some delightfully vicious vocals. Then we have Commandment in 2007. Not much fun to be had with these songs. It's not painful, just generic and forgettable. The DB parts are head bob worthy, but it's almost like a cheat code. Bled to Death has some more annoying vocals. You could do worse, but you can also do a lot better. So let's do that here. I considered the Black Dahlia Murder with Nocturnal, but I am going with Behemoth with the Apostasy. Super atmospheric, with the Rome 64 CE intro really setting the stage before going into Slaying the Prophets of Iza with those weird guitars that sound unlike any song I've really ever heard. And really, there are lots of cool moments in general on this album, like that eerie rolling acoustic guitar on At the Left Hand of God, and the absolutely punishing blast beats of Arcana Heretique. Liber Theme, Christ Grinding Avenue, Inner Sanctum, just a battering album.
Yeah, but you're making me look bad.
And we have 13 in 2005. Not a bad start to this one with Decomposition of the Human Race, solid groove, and Chris's vocals working fairly well. Rest in Pieces is also pretty fun, and the title track goes pretty hard. Pretty good hooks to Shadow of the Reaper, acceptable. One of the few albums, again, that I can kind of enjoy all the way through, but it can't hold a candle, once more, to Nile with Annihilation of the Wicked. This was actually the highest rated album of theirs on Metal Storm. I love the sitar intro, it really sets the stage, and then boom, Cast Down the Heretic just demolishes the listener. Also love Sacrifice unto Sebek with those wild melodies. Lashed to the Slave Stick is also excellent. Songs feel less insane but more dynamic, and even getting pretty doomy towards the end of this one. Of course, we have Bringer of Blood in 2003.
Garbage Day!
No! An album cover I very closely associate with this band, and I feel sums up kind of how they sound to me, at least. Sick in the Head is like a child thinking they're clever, replacing the lyrics to their high school spirit chant. America the Brutal, another especially bad performance, but on the flip side, Murdered in the Basement is kind of amusing. Not good, and yet somehow it made Billboard Heatseekers number 22 for 2 weeks, so somebody out there likes it.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
This is another case where I had two options and screw it. It's my list, my rules, so I'm going to do both of them. First, we have Dying Fetus with Stop at Nothing. Just so fast and aggressive, I'd even argue this is one of their heaviest overall. Great opener with that insane noisy riff on Schematics, and then other great tracks like One Shot, One Kill, Institutions of Deceit. Onslaught of Malice also has some serious foot-tapping D-beats. This thing just blazes by in 35 minutes. And then we also have Spawn of Possession with Cabinet. Another top-notch technical death metal debut that hit the ground running and fully formed alongside Necrophagist and the Faceless. Swarm of the Formless goes so hard, leaving the listener in a smoldering crater for the remainder of the album, and then Hidden in Flesh follows it up with absolutely dizzying stuff. Every track here is a 10 again, I would say, but other personal favorites include Dirty Priest, Spawn of Possession, and Cabinet. Clear influence on Archspire with some of these rapid-fire vocals, too. Then we have True Carnage in 2001. Just a few seconds into Impulse to Disembowel, and we have the true birth of the E here. I can't for the life of me understand people who listen to those vocals and not only don't laugh, but just straight up think that that's peak death metal. But those people do exist. I have talked to them in my comments.
Trash. Yeah, I love trash.
The Day the Dead Walked is especially hilarious, and the Ice-T feature on One Bullet Left is just beyond terrible. At least it's funny. Now for this year, I could have done Skinless with Foreshadowing Our Demise, but ultimately I went with Blood Red Throne with Monument of Death. The debut album from this Norwegian band, and already a very strong start. Portrait of a Killer, kicking into those thrashy transitions and hypnotic grooves. Souls of Damnation keeps that same energy going, and there's just this malevolent bloodthirst to The Children Shall Endure. Merry Whispers of Death and Ravenous War Machine are Rift City. Malignant Nothingness is infectious as all hell, and Dream Controlled Murder has some fantastic atmosphere. Then there's Maximum Violence in 1999. Definitely sounding a bit heavier in keeping with the title. Chris in particular seems like he's really going for the throat with these belted, syncopated screams on the opening track. And Closer Hacked to Pieces also making for standout performances, but unfortunately that intensity just doesn't carry all the way through. Likewise, really solid menacing atmosphere with some of the riffs courtesy to newcomer Steve Swanson at this point, making things more interesting than just pure groove. It's listenable, but this is a year where we have Necrophagist with Onset of Putrefaction. Recorded almost entirely by guitarist and vocalist Mohamed Soukmez. I never know how to pronounce his name, but with some additional help, and man, is it a wild ride and about as technical as they come with tracks like Intestinal Incubation and Culinary Hyperversity. And man, that bass on Fermented Awful Discharge is just wild. I'm also always just extra impressed with a band that can balance this level of showmanship with engaging songwriting so that it doesn't become style over substance. Then we have Warpath in 1997. More bluesy, groove-driven death metal here. Chris hasn't completely blown out his voice at this point either. Starting to E a little bit, but it's not quite the meme yet. Not bad, just bland and basic. Baby's first death metal. Revenge of the Zombie is kind of amusing. For this year, I went with Vital Remains with Forever Underground. This feels to me like a much more successful attempt at a similar sound, atmospheric, almost Danny Elfman-esque intro to the imposing title track, and then those cool synth elements find their way into others like I Am God. Killer blast beats on Battleground and the groovy Eastern Journey. Love the pop of the snare tone in the mix. One of my favorites from this band overall. And then of course we have their debut, Haunted, in 1995. Now, I hear a lot of people who hate this band as much as I do defend this album, and it's not without its catchier moments like Silent Violence. Fun groove to that one, but it's still pretty low when considering what other death metal was also coming out in this year. It's not unlistenable like some of their later albums, but I do find myself getting pretty bored. Other tracks I somewhat enjoy, like Anthropocene and Suffering and Ecstasy, but again, so many better options in 1995. Suffocations, Pierced from Within, Deicides, Once Upon the Cross, and Death Symbolic, just to name a few. But I am going with Morbid Angel with Domination. Also, the first album with Hate Eternal and now Cannibal Corpse guitarist Eric Rutan. Where the Slime Live may be my favorite Morbid Angel song, and it's just so weird and unique. This is a case where you take a vocal performance that is just so bizarre and memorable, but make it good. Like, that's way more than I can say about 6 Feet Under, in my opinion. It breaks out of the usual death metal mold, which I think makes this inclusion, again, even more relevant given 6 Feet Under's penchant to get bluesy as well. Continues to step up the atmosphere and the groove, but it leads to a more diverse array in terms of composition. Each song still has its own personality. Other great tracks here: Dominate, Eyes to See, Ears to Hear, and Dawn of the Angry. Y'all check out this video in case you missed my 6 Feet Under ranking of all their albums, or check out this playlist for some others in this series. I've also talked about albums better than Machine Head and albums better than Metallica. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.